and I did have my period, but I had my pads because I didn't know whether they were available there at that time. We had no choice. We had to use that. And I was worried that people would think that I was looking different. "You are a woman now," said my mother on that day in October 1966. "You are a woman now," said my mother on that day in October 1966. That was a long time ago, I think. I was 12 years of age. And I woke up that morning, went to the toilet, and saw a red stain on my white cotton panties. I looked. I didn't feel any hurt. There was no injury. So I just shrugged my shoulders, pulled out my panties, and went to have breakfast, hoping, thinking that it'll all go away. But of course it didn't go away, because when I went to have my shower, well, that stain had gotten bigger. So what to do? I had to confide in someone, and luckily for me, Big Sister was there. Big Sister lived in India. She was in Gujarat. She'd been married. But you know, according to Indian custom, when somebody is having a baby, she goes back to her mother's house so that she's cared for by a mother before and during and a little after the delivery. So there she was, and Big Sister was the one I was close to because she was the one that had dressed me to go to school and read to me when I was young. And my sister, she said, "Don't worry." And what she did was give me a pad. I'd never seen that before. It was this white thing, and in those days they were not non-stick, you know, the sticky ones that stuck onto your panties. They were non-stick. So how was I going to use this? They had loops at each end, and I had to have a little kind of a belt around my waist. It was not very comfortable, let me tell you. And there was only one brand available at that time in Singapore. And so we had no choice. We had to use that. And I was worried that people would think that I was looking different or walking different. But that was all me in my head. Nobody cared. Nobody bothered. And yes, there was some discomfort. I would get cramps sometimes, but they would go away too. What I did not like was that it lasted for 5 days. Oh, to me, that was a pain. But, you know, life goes on. There are other things happening. But then we went to India for a holiday. My parents come from Ahmedabad in Gujarat. And that's when, luckily, that first time in 1968, so I had my period for 2 years, we were only there for 1 month. And I did have my period, but I had my pads because I didn't know whether they were available there at that time. But there was a problem. You see, we were living in the inner city, and they did not have dustbins. What do I do with the pad that I wrapped up in the newspaper? That was a problem. And I saw what other people did with the rubbish. They would just throw it out for the sweeper to come. So that's what I did. But then I worried because there were also cows that were wandering around. And I was so worried that the cows that would eat all the whatever was there in terms of the food scraps, that they would manage to open up that newspaper wrap pad, and there the pad would be all there for everybody to see. I worried about that so much that I actually washed the blood off my pad before I wrapped it up. second trip was 1974 for 5 months because my brother was getting married and I hadn't entered university then, so there was a lot of time. And then I got even more worried. How could I have enough supplies for 5 months? And then my mother said, do what the Indians do. What do the Indians do? Well, they use rags. Rags? And then what do I do with the rags? You wash them. Wash them? Oh, that's gross, I thought. But then that made quite good sense for 5 months. And that's what I did. And then I thought later, how clever. What great recycling. And that's what I did for 5 months. Wash the rags, hang them up to dry, reuse them. And it actually worked quite well. And this is where I have to tell you that I thought that was one of the best systems of keeping yourself clean. Now, I didn't have too much trouble. It was more my mother who had that shock when I had my period at 12. I was not so lucky like Gogo Nodi, who had lessons at 10 years old. We had lessons when I went to high school. It was a bit too late for some of us who had already had their periods. And it was the biology teacher who taught us what menstruation was all about. I did not even know the word menstruation. Can you imagine? That's how little it was talked about. And I don't know whether I'm sure this still happens now, that I remember my mother telling me I could not go into the temple when I had my period. And I think this is still happening now amongst Hindu families. And I also remember reading about a group of women somewhere in the south of India who were fighting to enter temples. And I'm not sure what happened to that. Maybe Priyanka can tell us. And so the feelings that I remember from my childhood was that, yes, you do not talk about your periods. It's something women have to bear. And it is only much later that I learned that, wow, I have the power because my period is what tells me that at some point in time, my womb was getting ready to bear a child. And I thought, that is immense power that women do have. And I urge all of you young ones to really think of yourselves as empowered. And for the boys and young men, if there are any around in the Zoom chat, support your sisters, your cousin, your mother, your aunt. Because without their periods, you would not be on this earth today.